Oh man, that is a killer question. 'Cause you would honestly probably get just a tiny handful of people who'd be on board. At 68, Vince Gill still has this aura of the humble, guitar-slinging poet that fans fell head over heels for decades ago. But lurking behind that smooth-as-silk voice and a mountain of Grammy Awards is a side of Gill the public almost never sees. The silent judge, the cutthroat competitor, the man who's locked away his true feelings, buried under decades of that good old boy country charm. His entire career, Gill has been secretly seething over artists who chased fame instead of honing their craft, who twisted the sacred rules of tradition, or who flat-out disrespected the very genre he dedicated his life to defending. And now, in a bombshell interview, Vince Gill is finally dropping the names of these 7 artists. You might think you know the real Vince Gill, but trust me, after this, you will never listen to his music or theirs the same way ever again. Let's rewind to the very beginning, before all the fame, before the bitter feuds. Because I promise you, by the time we get to the final name on his hit list, you are going to question absolutely everything you thought you knew about country music royalty. The making of Vince Gill. He came up in Norman, Oklahoma, a far cry from the bright lights of Nashville, but just close enough to dream big. Vince Gill was born into a home absolutely overflowing with music and some seriously tough lessons. His father was a federal judge and a weekend musician, a man who was strict as they come, but loving. And it was from him that Gill learned the ironclad discipline and the soul of a guitar lessons that would forge not just his music, but his entire identity. Vince's road to stardom was a brutal path, paved with absolute heartbreak. He cut his teeth in bluegrass bands in his early days, grinding it out at tiny, thankless gigs, sleeping in the back of a van, and taking whatever measly pay he could scrape together. He had to learn to survive on pure, raw talent, sheer grit, and the nod of approval from other musicians who saw he had that once-in-a-generation gift. But then, everything changed. The moment he joined the country rock outfit Pure Prairie League, his voice started turning heads, and this time, the world was ready to listen. Through the 80s and 90s, he became an absolute titan of the country scene. A staggering 21 Grammy wins, more CMA awards than you can count, and the kind of deep respect that came from every single corner of the industry. He earned the title of a songwriter's songwriter, a true musician who absolutely refused to take shortcuts and who never, ever chased a cheap trend. His guitar playing was pure elegance, his lyrics bled honesty. But with all that incredible success came something else, something dark: disappointment. Because behind the curtain, Vince was forced to watch as the genre he adored began to morph into something ugly, faster, flashier, and sickeningly commercial. Country music was changing, and it wasn't a change he could respect. He saw artists skyrocket to fame based on their look instead of their talent. He had to watch as real, heartfelt songwriting was replaced by cookie-cutter, mass-market formulas. Trophies and awards started going to acts that he knew in his gut hadn't paid their dues, people who built entire careers on cheap gimmicks, catchy phrases, and shock value instead of any real substance. He'd sit through those star-studded award shows, clapping politely on the outside, while on the inside, his blood was absolutely boiling. He saw performers shamelessly lip-syncing, while true musicians were shoved into the shadows. He watched the big-shot executives reward the artists who were better at playing politics than playing their instruments. And the absolute worst part? He had a front-row seat to watch the very soul of country music, the truth, the struggle, the humility, get completely gutted and replaced by Instagram filters, flashy lights, and a phony, manufactured rebellion. For years he bit his tongue and played the game. But now, the gloves are finally off. Vince never ever named names, until now. Kris Kristofferson. We make it through the night. Pretty great. Why me? Lord is great. But would you call this guy a great times singer asterisk? Not necessarily. And that statement alone sent shockwaves through his fan base, because for decades, in public, Vince Gill would sing the praises of all the legends, the absolute giants who built country music. But behind the curtain, there was one name that insiders whispered Vince wouldn't even touch: Kris Kristofferson. These two were from completely different universes. Kris was the renegade poet, raw, untamed, a total wild card. He was notorious for crashing parties, stumbling his way through interviews, and somehow he'd still leave with the entire room in awe. But Vince? He was the total opposite, meticulous, polished to a shine, a master technician in the studio, and an absolute perfectionist on stage. For Vince, it was all about flawless skill, perfect lyrical architecture, and ironclad vocal control. And while Vince never publicly went after Kristofferson, you could feel the ice in the air, the way he'd dance around his name in interviews, those pregnant pauses. It was a silence that screamed volumes. And this one story from a CMA rehearsal? It became the stuff of Nashville legend for years. The story goes, when Kristofferson was about to take the stage, Vince allegedly bolted early, muttering something under his breath about not sticking around to watch another disaster unfold on stage. It was never officially confirmed, but in Nashville, a story that good doesn't need proof to become gospel. Behind closed doors, they say Vince was absolutely infuriated by how the critics glorified Kristofferson's chaotic style, calling it authentic and real, while other, more disciplined artists who bled for their craft were completely ignored. A close confidant swore Vince once vented, "That's not profound, it's just a mess. We dropped the standard to the floor and called it genius." He didn't despise Kristofferson's success. He absolutely resented how it completely changed the definition of greatness. For Vince, true artistry was about mastering your craft, period. But Kris, from Vince's point of view, had just skipped all the hard work and was being celebrated for the wreckage. The years rolled on, but that undercurrent of tension never really disappeared. You saw no duets, no tributes, no team-ups, nothing. Even when Vince was front and center at events honoring the other giants from Kristofferson's time, Kris's name was glaringly, deafeningly absent, like a ghost who was intentionally uninvited. And now, in a shocking moment of raw honesty, Gill finally puts him on the list, not out of pure spite, but because the chasm between them was just too massive to ignore. But if Vince saw Kristofferson as the poster child for chaos, the next artist on his list represented something far more sinister in his eyes. The exact moment country music sold its very soul, Garth Brooks. It feels like blasphemy to even whisper about tension between Vince Gill and Garth Brooks, two absolute titans of the industry, two names literally carved into the DNA of country music. But if you've been paying attention, if you caught all the subtle jabs and cold shoulders, the massive rift between them is impossible to miss. Vince was the master craftsman, the quiet poet, the guy who would lock himself away for hours, chasing the perfect solo, reworking a single verse until it bled pure truth. And then there was Garth. He stormed in with fire, headset mics, and an ego big enough to fill a stadium. He single-handedly turned country shows into explosive rock spectacles, and for a lot of people, Vince included, it felt like he was stomping all over something sacred. And it wasn't just the over-the-top performances, it was the entire philosophy. Gill worshipped at the altar of nuance, restraint, and melody. Garth, on the other hand, worshipped movement, flash, and sheer, epic scale. While Vince could break your heart with a single, quiet whisper, Garth would just roar about it to a packed arena. Gill saw himself as a guardian of country music's sacred roots. But Garth, in his eyes, was the mastermind behind its corporate takeover, for better or for worse. In interviews, Gill once tragically mourned that we've lost the stories in country music. He never named names, he didn't have to, because every single fan knew exactly who he was talking about. He didn't need to say Garth's name. Everybody knew who blew up the rulebook and completely rerouted the river of country music. And when Garth started selling out massive arenas and just dominating every single award show, a ton of people felt like the very soul of country music was just vanishing into thin air. And there was Vince, with his heart-wrenching ballads and mind-blowing guitar solos, getting quietly shoved out of the spotlight. Now, insiders whisper that while Vince put on a gracious face for the cameras, behind closed doors, he was absolutely mourning what his beloved genre was turning into. He even supposedly turned down chances to present Garth with Lifetime Achievement Awards. And it wasn't out of some petty bitterness, but because he just couldn't bring himself to fake an admiration that simply wasn't there. This was way more than just a clash of styles. It was a full-blown philosophical war. For Vince, country music was never about the flashy fireworks or diving into the crowd. It was about raw storytelling, deep roots, and a whole lot of humility. And Garth, despite all his insane success, symbolized an era where those core values were completely swallowed up by the deafening roar of the crowd. So, was it jealousy? Or was it just pure heartbreak? The pain of watching a genre you love morph into something you can't even recognize? It was probably both. But whatever it was, one thing was clear. Gill never ever celebrated Garth's victories. You wouldn't catch him clapping during those thunderous standing ovations, and you'd never see him in one of those reserved front row seats. All right, next up, the mullet-wearing heartthrob who blew up country music, but for all the absolute worst reasons, Billy Ray Cyrus. Aki Breaky Heart literally made Billy Ray Cyrus a superstar overnight. The song was an earworm. It went viral before going viral was even a phrase, and it launched country music straight into the pop culture stratosphere. But believe me, not everyone was cheering, especially not Vince Gill. A man whose entire musical DNA was woven from jazz-level complexity, profound songwriting, and the sacred values of traditional country, reportedly considered the track a total slap in the face to real musicianship. And he wasn't quiet about it in a CMA green room. Gill was overheard cracking a joke that Billy Ray's little ditty set country music back a solid 10 years. And trust me, this wasn't just some throwaway comment. That single quote spread like absolute wildfire through Nashville's inner circles, fueling a firestorm of speculation that Gill saw Billy Ray not just as an artist, but as a direct threat to the very integrity of the genre. You see, for Vince, country music was meant to be about real stories, about pain, hope, and undeniable truth. But then in comes Billy Ray, armed with a cheesy one-liner hook, a ridiculous dance craze, and a marketing machine so massive it just drowned out everything and everyone else. Gill once allegedly quipped that the song wasn't country music, it was just karaoke with a mullet. The two of them never collaborated. They never shared a single stage, and if they ever happened to pass each other in a hallway, the word on the street is that it was absolutely ice cold. While other artists were desperately trying to balance innovation with a deep respect for their roots, Billy Ray just seemed to sprint in the complete opposite direction. He leaned hard into the flash, the hair, the hip swiveling, the whole gimmick. For Vince, the whole spectacle felt like a cheap parody of everything country was supposed to stand for. Something heartfelt, grounded, and born from real, lived experience. Look, Gill didn't hate Billy Ray, the person he never had to. What he couldn't stand was everything Billy Ray represented. This tidal wave of gimmicky, image-obsessed, style-over-substance music that was dragging Nashville in a direction Gill had spent his entire life fighting against. And the next artist on his list? Oh, she sold more albums than almost anyone in the history of the genre. And yet, Gill reportedly couldn't even stand to listen to her records. Shania Twain. To the rest of the world, Shania Twain was the undisputed queen of country pop. Her rise wasn't just fast, it was meteoric, it was revolutionary, glamorous, and absolutely unstoppable. But to the purists, including a certain Vince Gill, she was something else entirely. A total disruptor. Her slick, glossy production, her pop-soaked hooks, and her insane crossover appeal left almost no oxygen in the room for the kind of raw, roots-driven music that Gill championed. And in her wake, a whole tidal wave of artists followed, all of them chasing that same sleek, pop-friendly formula. Tossing aside sacred tradition for soulless, focus-grouped hooks and flashy, million-dollar music videos. And even though he never dared to say her name out loud, Gill dropped a bombshell, claiming we tragically lost an entire generation of true country fans by chasing cheap radio hits. But he didn't stop there. Sometimes we forget what genre we're even in. For anyone who'd loved country music for years, the message was absolutely crystal clear. And get this, while pretty much every icon in the business eventually teams up for a tribute, a duet, or at least shares a single stage, Gill and Twain, they never did. Not once during her meteoric rise. Not at a single awards show, and not even at those huge, genre-bending tributes, where their names absolutely belonged right next to each other. For two superstars dominating the same world, that kind of silence wasn't just weird, it was absolutely deafening. Whispers from behind Nashville's closed doors claimed Vince saw Shania's explosion as the catastrophic tipping point, the moment Nashville started chasing fleeting trends over raw talent, and the moment country music began to sound like anything but what it was meant to be. And then came the next artist who basically invented bro country and left Vince utterly speechless, Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean absolutely crashed onto the scene, armed with baseball caps, screaming guitars, and lyrics all about trucks, whiskey, and tailgates, instead of the raw heartbreak and truth country was built on. His sound was a sonic boom, his brand was in your face, and his fan base blew up seemingly overnight. But while the mainstream masses were eating it up, let's just say not everyone in Nashville was rolling out the welcome mat. Vince Gill, on the other hand, has always treated songwriting as a sacred art form, viewing storytelling as the very soul of music, and he made no secret of his disgust for the whole bro country wave. I think we've dumbed it down. He once fired off to Rolling Stone, "There's room for fun in music, but let's not kid ourselves and pretend it's country, just because you threw a pickup truck in the video." And that wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark, it was a full-blown shot across the bow. For Gill, Aldean's insane popularity was just another nail in the coffin, a total betrayal of the values he had fought tooth and nail to protect. The ear-splitting production, the paper-thin lyrics, and what Gill slammed as lifestyle marketing instead of real, lived experience. It was the exact opposite of everything he believed country music should be. And even though both Aldean and Gill have graced the stages of major country festivals, they have mysteriously never, ever shared a bill. The word on the street is that Gill has flat-out refused to present or even show up to any event where Aldean was the main attraction. And this wasn't some petty ego trip. This was about the very identity of country music. Gill just couldn't stomach it. He couldn't bring himself to endorse the spectacle Aldean represented. The gap between them wasn't just about style, it was a deep, philosophical chasm. One man built a legacy on pure substance, the other built an empire on spectacle. But if you think Aldean was too much for Gill, the next guy on the list might have been too much for the entire planet, Kanye West. Now, this might sound completely insane, but just hear us out. Vince Gill never, ever said Kanye's name, but in interview after interview, he's made one thing painfully clear. He believes the monstrous ego in modern music is suffocating the art. He's openly blasted artists who chase fame instead of honing their craft, who choose spectacle over substance. And if that sounds like someone we know, well, it should. Because in 2016, Gill dropped this bombshell in an interview. "I see these young artists walk into a room and just expect the entire world to bow down to them. Back in my day, you earned respect by shutting up and listening first." And when the interviewer pushed him, asking if he had anyone specific in mind, Gill just flashed a knowing smile and said absolutely nothing. But the timing of that quote? Oh, it was anything but a coincidence. It dropped the very same month. Kanye West infamously declared himself the greatest artist of all time. During one of his legendary rants, the media went into a frenzy, and fans everywhere were reading between the lines. But inside the industry, everyone knew without a single doubt exactly who Vince was targeting. Because for Gill, music is sacred. It's about humility. It's all about service and heart, not crashing award shows and desperately begging for attention every second of the day. And Kanye, whether he meant to or not, turned into the ultimate symbol of everything Vince fought against. Total chaos over quiet control, a shrine to the self instead of a gift of the soul. They've never even been in the same room, and they never needed to be, because for Vince, this was never about musical genres, it was a battle of values. So now you've heard it, the 7 names that Vince Gill simply couldn't tolerate. Out in the open or whispered in secret, from industry titans to pop royalty and genre-smashing mavericks, these weren't just friendly disagreements. No, these were seismic cracks in the foundation of country music itself, defining moments where Vince chose integrity over fame and silence over a sellout.